Well, happy Monday night, everybody. I'm Aaron here in the Bowtie Treasure Studio. I'm a Dixie Belle content creator, and I'm here in Pensacola, Florida. How are you? Where are you from? Why don't you let us know here in the comments. It's always a delight to have you all joining us. I'm always elated to be in this group, hanging out with you all, watching tonight. We have a fantastic piece of furniture behind me. It is a secretary desk. I went back and looked at some of my previous work, and about every time I get one of these secretary desks, I paint it vintage duck egg. There's just something about vintage duck egg in these desks. I think they're a match made in heaven, so it works out really well, and I'm always happy to do that. Tonight, I'm going to do a little bit of a technique that's related to what we typically might do with white Dixie Belle whitewash glaze, and let me just show you that product. This is the whitewash glaze. There you go. This glaze has a little bit of top coat in there. I've done a lot of glazing. You can go to my YouTube channel. Fine, but I don't want to use whitewash. I want to use more of a softer tone color. Most of the time when I'm doing these types of cabinets or secretary desk, I like to put a pop of contrast in the cabinet, and I'm going to do buttercream in there. So I'm going to use buttercream as somewhat of my wash tonight, and then I'm going to glam it up with a little bit of gold gilding wax. So definitely stay tuned for a little bit for me to showcase that. I think it's a fabulous combination. So really what I'm trying to accomplish with the buttercream is somewhat of just knocking down the fresh single coat of color and give it a little bit of age and soften it up. And the gold's gonna give it a little bit more a pop of color, and I think all in all it's gonna come together really well. If you've ever painted a project like this, you're gonna find that bigger pieces like this take a little bit more time. In fact, the inside is still bossed because I have taped off the line between buttercream and vintage duck egg. So once I get all my vintage duck egg done and top coated, I'll switch to the inside and I'll do buttercream. I'm not painting the desk portion. In fact, tonight I'm going to start on the lid that goes right here. And you can see on the other side it's raw wood or original wood. So that's the plan for that. So again, thanks for watching tonight. In the description of this live, I put a link to my link to Dixie Belle that you can use to go find a retailer in your area, or if you don't have one nearby, or if you're even watching from across the world, be sure to use that link to check out Dixie Belle's great line of products. I want to showcase tonight Dixie Belle's natural brushes. So there you go. And so this is the premium chip brush. This is great for washes, regular painting. It's a very affordable brush, but it's not necessarily I don't use it for daily painting, but for things that I'm just trying to get a color on there. But this is still a natural brush. This is the Belle brush. This is a nice small natural bristle, and I love the tapered. This is great for blending and doing small feathery kind of finishes, really nice. This is the French tip. You can also notice that it's kind of a rounded edge. And sometimes after you use it a lot, it gets a little flatter, but it still has a nice tapered edge. Love this brush. This is the La Petite brush. So it's got a nice thick handle. It's great for waxes. I don't do waxes much, but I still love the rounded tapered finish. Really great for a lot of the techniques I use. And this one is the best dang brush. Get those words out. And the thing about this one, it does have a flat edge, so it's great for doing larger surface blending. It doesn't have a tapered rounded edge, so it might be a little difficult for softening edges per se, but it's a natural bristle. The difference between a natural bristle is you can see the difference in color. It's not to say that this is 100% natural, but the main idea of this is natural, and this is what we would consider synthetic. So there is a difference. Doesn't mean that you have to use these brushes to do what I'm doing tonight, but I really am a huge fan of the natural bristle brushes. And so I encourage you to check out that full line. There's different sizes, so it really can accommodate a lot of your projects as you're working on them. All right, so what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to pull in the camera, and we're going to start off with somewhat of a demo board. And when I say demo board, it's just the front of the desk. I thought this would be a nice small space because my desk is so tall. It's hard to chase around the camera. So I'm going to demonstrate what we're going to do tonight. And we'll just keep an eye on the clock and we'll get as much of this done as we can. The look I'm going for is what you might see with the pickling or whitewash look. I want to get the color in there. And just a little bit closer so you can see the detail. So I want to bring the color into all the details. I want these details to pop. Although I'm doing gold gilding wax, I still want to soften it up. It's just flat. There's not a lot of depth to this, and the buttercream should help us do that. There are multiple ways to accomplish what I'm doing tonight. And for this detail, I think I'm going to use the French tip. I think that size is really convenient, but I'm going to keep nearby everything from the, we might use the premium chip, just to keep in the natural family. We're just going to kind of go with the flow, if you will. I would recommend for this that you have a misting bottle. Dixie Belle has a really nice continuous misting bottle, and that does really work. All right, so let me put some paint on. I am going to use, let's say, a 1-inch brush to apply the paint, because I'm going to save my natural bristles for the other technique. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to apply a mist over my area, dip into my buttercream, and then I'm actually going to push in the paint into around. I want this to be all into the depths and the crevices. I want this to be all up in there. Okay, so you can see it's a little messy, but this is where we're going to clean it up. So at this point right now, I've done a pretty good job of getting it in there. Just work it in. Now watch what we can do with different brushes. So this is the French tip. It's still, I don't know if you can tell, but it's still misted. So I can actually, you see how I'm kind of vignetting that, fading it, softening it out? That's really too much glow. That's not the look I'm going for. You can actually take a brush and wipe that off. But let's go a little further. So let me just continue demonstrating. And I just showcased this about a week or so ago. You see how I can rub that off? And we could even take this chip brush and I can fan that out. I'm using a very slight pressure, and I can even still use my rag and wipe off some of that paint. You can do this with glazes. You can do this with Voodoo Gel Stain. You can see kind of the look, and I'm looking on the camera right now. If you get too much, use a wet rag. When I say wet, it's kind of damp. I like to call it my eraser, and just go back and re-soften it because it's still slightly wet. So that is an example of what you can do with just chalk paint. What I like to do, I'm actually going to just wet the whole surface, because I think what I'd like to do is put a little bit of chalk paint throughout. Remember, I'm trying to not have, let's just kind of create this vignette. Water is your friend in this case because you want to move the paint. If you do not wet this, you are not going to be moving paint. It's going to get into all the things and you're going to be stuck. So I love water. On my YouTube channel, I have a playlist called shading. I use the word shading sometimes. And shading for me is what I use to blend and soften paint, vignette paint. I'm putting paint on the sides because I don't want to forget. You notice I'm moving quickly just because I'm fighting time and things drying. I don't top coat first. Common question I get. Okay, so you see how I did that? Now it's time to move that paint around. I rarely use the chip brush for this, but it's going to quickly help me move this paint around. You see how I'm going to slowly soften those edges. I'm also, by doing this, I am painting, because it's chalk paint, I'm actually painting over the original vintage duck egg. Notice now I'm going up and down. When I'm done, there should not be any original vintage duck egg left. Not that I have a problem with that look, but I want to soften the vintage duck egg. So you can say, okay, too much white? So good, well that's fine. Let's do like what I do with whitewash sometimes. Let's erase or remove some of the extra paint. I have it on like little painters triangles. So this right now, I would call this somewhat of erasing, or removing paint. Now, I'm just grabbing brushes to showcase what they can do. This is the besting brush. So this is where a large surface would work. You don't need all these brushes. I can do this with the premium chip brush, but I'm just showcasing how I might use the different brushes. See how I'm just removing any of those brush strokes? You can stop at just using the rag, but I find sometimes the rag leaves just marks and things that you don't want. Go left and right. I'm removing any signs of brush strokes, awkward erasing I did. Go side to side if you want. You're looking for a continuous tone. I don't plan on going this far into the entire piece, but I'm just trying to showcase how this technique could work. All right, you remember that I did, so remember how we did this one? I did not do the lower ones. We need to do those. So let me do that real quick. So we're stepping back a little bit, and that's okay. Just showcasing. I'm not going to miss my project. I'm going to miss my brush because I don't want to get a bunch of spots everywhere. It would have been better to do all this ahead of time, like all 3 sections at the same time. I'm going to have to miss it. I apologize if this comes across as a bit random, but when you're featuring different things, products, projects, I am trying to showcase a lot of options for you. So you see how I'm fading that, almost making it so you can't tell where I put the brush? And now we're going to come back and wipe off. I am not wet distressing, and if I wanted to wet distress, I would have had to do it shortly after I painted the vintage duck egg, but I'm not doing that. I'm not really trying to get all the paint off, okay? I'm just trying to create some depth because I know I'm putting gilding wax on there. Okay. This one has more glow around it than this one does. So let's be kind to this side and give it a little bit of extra love too. I think vintage duck egg is probably my top favorite color. And it's kind of weird that I don't know why I seem to favor that one every time I do a secretary desk. But. So you can create a glowing, a soft vignette. You can create however you want to describe it. Maybe you have some words you would say, but accentuate, highlights. Okay, so we just created a nice, get the right place, just a soft glow. In a sec. So I'm just going to work my way over, but let's do from edge to edge, okay? So first thing I'm going to do is just mist the whole area. Next thing I'm going to do is grab my 1-inch brush. I'm just going to touch it in, excuse me, into the paint. I want the most paint to go around the scroll and decorative work. These are not wood you've been molding, but I have used wood you've been molding when a secretary desk like this doesn't have. I just think whenever you have a large surface that's antique, it's always great to add. Keep your misting bottle handy because if you sense that at any time this wants to start getting dry or sticky, you need to keep it wet because it'll stay movable longer. Now I could just paint the whole surface, but you're going to be removing a ton of paint, and that's what I don't want to do, is remove a ton of paint. You're just going to get your rag all covered with mineral paint. Okay, so there we go. So just kind of aggressively push it in there, get it in the nooks, and just get it in there. And that's it. We're going to give it a quick mist, move my paint out of the way, just to keep it wet. Remember, we use the chip. If you need to, take your rag, sometimes wipe it off. But here's where I'm just going to blend that all in there. I'm also putting some on the top so I don't miss that. If it feels anything like dry paint, you need to add more water. You want this wet. You see how I'm pushing the extra paint around? That's why I didn't need extra paint anywhere. There's plenty around the scroll. Tell you what, let me do. Let me just see if I can turn my camera, my project, so it's not so much glare. That's one thing we don't always get in this business is extra set of hands to do the extra camera work. Okay, you see how quickly I'm moving? I'm probably going faster than you really have to go. I see one area I want to do. Do you see the shelf right here? Let's go ahead and do the inside corner. So I'm not just doing the corners, I'm doing any cracks and areas that need it. So you can see I just did there. You're simulating the idea that this has been waxed with white wax and, you know, has not been removed over time per se. And I'm only doing sections at a time. What I mean by that, you don't want to do this top and then move the bottom, just section at a time. So here's where I said a while ago is you need to decide too much, not enough. I'm going to wipe off a little bit more. That paint, that chalk paint, is still getting into the wood or the vintage duck egg. So this is just part of the paint, adapt, adjust to taste. You use your vision. We call this the editing process. If you say, "Oh, that's turning out horrible," well, for your project it might be. And here's where you might say, "Okay, I'm going to switch brushes." Remember on the front of the door, it was a much smaller piece. Now we're getting a little bit bigger. I'm not going to use the chip brush, or I could use a separate chip brush. Now I'm using the La Petite. Just trying to showcase the different brushes. Now, because I've done this a few times on different projects, I kind of know what techniques to use, but every project I do is different. So it's not like I have this memorized. So again, I'm editing and doing this for the first time with you all. You just have to figure out how much white to use or to leave on your piece. Maybe you want a little bit more glow or less white in the center. Fine. Wipe it off, fade it out. We used a while ago the best dang brush. You can still use that. So again, still showcasing different brushes. But you will see no brush strokes with this. It's just going to feel soft, cloudy, maybe delicate would be a word, aged in a nice angelic way. Angelic's a great word, how about that? So the decorative elements are accentuated, and if I go in close, you can see that the white's staying in the cracks. That's what we want. Notice on the far side over here, I've got a little bit of a inconsistent area. I've been saying a lot more lately, don't stress over perfection. Sometimes I feel like you're in the wrong business if you're overstressed, especially for something that's so old. It's not worth it. Now you'll start, after a while, kind of need to start letting it go because it's going to start drying and you're going to have places that are wet. At this point, it would be good just to kind of sit back, and you're kind of running out of time. You don't want, if you start misting it again, you'll probably start putting spots on your piece, and that's not a good plan. So, okay. I'm just removing some areas that kind of splattered on, but that's okay. So that looks right where I want it to be for this project. So I tell you what, let's do. Let me look at the time. We're doing great. Let's do one more. Let's do the lower door. And while the top's drying, we'll come back to the top for the gold gilding wax, okay? And just follow the same technique. So mist. I'll have to do a lot of this off camera just because of time. But we'll go back to the 1-inch brush, just a touch of paint. I like to start on the decorative scrolling work. So we've just really knocked that down, and let's just do a quick. All right, so keep in mind that the next step I consider optional. Optional because you might not want the gold. You might have someone who doesn't want that, but I think this, in order for this hardware to really sing, it needs a little help. Now, gold gilding wax or other colors, you have to decide what works best for you. Sometimes I will also let the hardware dictate. Most of the time you're going to see some kind of bronze or gold hardware. But in this case, I'm going with gold. One, it does complement the color because it has a warm tone to it, and vintage duck egg is a cool tone, a cool hue, if you will. You can use your finger, but I like to be right on the details and kind of brush and fade. And see how I'm kind of lifting out and just fade that gilding wax. You can also go where you totally cover the entire mold. I like just getting the edge and let it kind of look like it's fading out. The nice thing is there's just enough molding and decorative features on this piece that the gold touches won't overpower. There's plenty of vintage duck egg to go around. I do like using gold gilding wax sometimes on the hardware once I clean it, if it needs to be tied together, and sometimes that has to happen. Okay. And then sometimes I'll just kind of highlight some sections, like at least touch it, but not put 100% hold on. It's gonna go right there. Look at that wonderful centerpiece that it has now. And that just really pulls the buyer in. So again, there'll be another plate here, and there's a plate down below. And hopefully, I'll make sure they all work really well together. It's just hard to get this detail on all to work out. You can see how I'm applying it though. It's the beauty of the brush. It allows me to not to have to lean over so far. This is the whole thing I was telling you a while ago, where you just don't sweat perfection. I'm not trying to cover the entire thing, I just need to get some on there. And that's really what we're trying to do. Probably something like a copper or bronze would be my other choice because it has red tones in it, and it would allow for a complement color with the vintage duck egg to work. And there are so many variations of this particular type of furniture out there, and they usually do have some kind of scroll work on them. But I have added some would you bend on a couple of them that I've done. So in order to accomplish this look tonight, we have what we would almost call washed and toned down the vintage duck egg to give it more of a light pastel feel. And now we're applying gold gilding wax. So yeah, I just need to keep going on all this. It's therapeutic. And then again, I'll just rub that in there. I'm hearing yeses. I may not be saying yes, but I'm hearing yeses. If you're still here, You're probably saying yes. So when everything's all said and done, I will have something like, I don't know if that's going to show up, so it'll all work out really well. So I didn't totally remove the duck egg, but I washed it enough that it, at least in person, it's just soft. And but I really like how all the gold's working out. I can't wait to get it done. As I mentioned a while ago, the cabinet part is currently gray boss. And let me just show you. I've taped off the inside where I want the duck egg to stop and where the buttercream's going to go. That's kind of the plan. And you can see I've also taped on where the desk is. I've taped all that off so that I don't get paint where I don't want it there. So just, you got to let one section dry and get done before you move on to the next. That's it for tonight. Try some new brushes. Again, my link is in the description. Take a look at some of these natural brushes. I think we used about 4 tonight. I did not use the Belle brush, but that's a great choice. Just depends on the size of your project. Try the wet chalk paint wash idea. I showed it. Hopefully that helps you. Keep it wet, move that around. Let those brushes soften it up. I have no brush strokes visible right now, and those brushes really help me for that. If you have any questions about this technique, let me know. Thank you, friends. We'll talk to you later, and take care. Do something creative. Be awesome. See you later.
That's the end of the show. Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell before you go. Bye.